here's Charles Big Angry Adams.
And just make them keep people safe.
You saw some people rush towards his car. We're bickering over whether or not women have control of their body.
And I just...
Man, you look like an old broke Elvis Presley.
I look like, I look like an old broke down bad
Elvis Presley.
I look like
Somebody
Shrek
picked you up off
Shadow. It is true, right? This is a very appropriate prosecution. They're all pushing narratives right now. It was painful for me to see my good friend Bun cry.
To get wealth, but clearly this is a sick woman who has visited a lot of pain on her child, and it's a horrifying story.
It is horrifying, and over the last 24 hours, we've heard these explosive new details. Or face any charges here?
Well, I mean, there's possible the abuse or assault, but it sounds like he was free to leave, like he lived just under an assumed identity in the neighborhood. It sounds like he wasn't held captive. It might be Stockholm Syndrome, but it just sounds like this very manipulative woman in the wake of tragedy. Let's not forget, Rudy's father committed suicide after he was an HPD officer after being exposed in a scandal. His older brother was killed on a motorcycle. This is a young man whose life has been filled with tragedy. And I do feel like a lot of people, both in the media and the public, are piling on him, whereas clearly he's a victim. But the question, Caroline, is whether or not his victimization is a crime that can be established by HPD and Kim Ogg's office, and I don't think that it is, and I don't think we should expect any charges.
I mean, he won't marry you. If he won't put a ring on it, he got his place and you got yours.
Well, you know, that's a horrifying, that's just the misogyny of yesteryear. That's a brainwashing of women to think that they're somehow less than. And you say all women, but you seem to have excluded lesbians from that equation. Why should they have to have a man at all? Why should any woman have to define their self-worth by the self-worth of another man, of another person that happens to have a penis? The truth is that adults should be able to make adult decisions. And the government, whether it's a Muslim theocracy in Indonesia or Christian right-wing theocrats here in this country, they should not. And it's always shocking to me because you play the activist, but you have these incredibly intolerant conservative views when it comes to people like the LGBT community.
See, you think you slick.
One of the things that he did in the criminal justice space, the only thing that he did was comprehensive sentencing reform
and
freed
he should be applauded for that.
Of black men.
Well, what is coming out during the sentencing, where you're hearing some horrifying testimony from the victims, is a culture that many people have complained about in America for years. Everyone that's upset about this conviction of Daniel Perry, if Daniel Perry was the Black Lives Matter protester and the victim was the conservative, you would have everyone flip-flopping in this because everyone's just lying all the time. But
it was painful for me to see my good friend Bun cry, which is not something I've seen before. It brought tears to my eye, but I was most impressed with the courage of Queenie Freeman, right? This had a devastating impact on her life. For people who don't know, he pushed his way into her house, put a gun to her head, repeatedly threatened her life. Later in the shootout with Bun, did shoot at Bun, but told Queenie many times he was going to kill her. And Queenie, trying to save her husband's life, insisted that he stay upstairs. Obviously, he didn't listen. But this was a courageous woman.
How dare Fox call this an after party? It should be called a wake because we're witnessing the death of America.
I know I've been changed.
Thank you.
Hallelujah, brother. Preacher on.
But the truth is, what we just heard here, just like we heard on camera, Kamala didn't answer the question at all. And the moderators did not push her to answer the question while they pushed him very hard. He was fighting a war on three fronts, which defense attorneys often find themselves doing in the courtroom. I don't think that Donald Trump believes he could actually go to prison for this, but both, much like his prosecution in Manhattan, there is the potential result of a former president of the United States being imprisoned while he's actually seeking to return to the executive office of this country.
Texas and Arizona and New Mexico's realities and the impact it has on public health systems, on public education systems, on law enforcement were completely ignored by the left on the East Coast. Now they're having to address it head on, and they're talking about the financial consequences, and that's an incredible win for the governor. You found those photos to be sexualized?
Oh, by him, absolutely.
Were you sexually attracted to those
Not
photos?
at all, because I'm a Muslim and we don't believe in that lifestyle choice.
Color me shocked that you are straining to find some reason to condemn a man for supporting his LGBTQ daughter also color me shocked, well, truly shocked, because that was nonsense, that at the end of you hate mongering, the end of you spewing your vitriol at Marlon, you then criticize other people for doing the same damn thing. This is a father. This is Pride Month. He is trying to show support for his child, so he made a post in support of his child. Who are you to judge how he shows support? This is just your thinly veiled homophobia coming out as a reason to attack Marlon Wayans, just like all the other. And this is why we can't have reasonable conversation about this subject. This is why, because people still spew hatred and nonsense about gay people being immoral just for being gay.
That was
right? Now,
never
hold
the
on,
discussion.
Hold on. This
And
is
that
why
never came out.
This is why when reasonable people like me say, hey, you know, Leah Thomas, that pinned the Ivy League swimmer, a trans woman who was dominating the field, right? She just lost her appeal.
The man
last
who was
week.
dominating the field.
She just lost her appeal to participate in Olympic competition, in world aquatic events, right? They said, no, you went through puberty as a male, you've got to compete as a male. And that's reasonable.
But this is very commonplace in America. But the assumption that law enforcement makes is that when you're carrying a large amount of cash, it must be for an illegal reason. So they seize it on suspicion and then file a lawsuit, which you as the owner of the money have to respond to with a lawyer, typically, and fight to get your money back. The government knowing that most people aren't going to be able to afford the fight, or even if they do, they can negotiate the opportunity to keep a portion of it, which is not at all what asset forfeiture was supposed to be. Asset forfeiture was supposed to be when the government was aware that somebody was engaged in organized criminal activity or some sort of crime, that they could keep the proceeds. But really now, it's just a way to steal money from your average American citizen. Our founding fathers would be rolling over in their grave. But we should really all be advocating for both states and the federal government to have to file criminal charges as a predicate to seizing money. Or even if they do seize money, if there are no subsequent criminal charges, force them to return it to citizens. And until enough people get mad enough about it, nothing's going to change. But Jonathan, you would be disturbed at the numbers. This is so common. And it's not just at the airport, although it occurs there all the time. It's on traffic stops where they find no contraband, no evidence of illegal activity, simply a large amount of money and then an explanation that they don't want to accept. And there are, if you Google it, there are just horror stories all across this country. There's a popular misconception that the parents are being sued for the conduct of their son, for the murder of Gabby Petito, and that's not the case. They're being sued for the intentional infliction of emotional distress after Gabby was murdered by the scumbag, but before she was actually identified as deceased. The Laundrie family stands accused in this lawsuit of knowingly having their attorney issue a statement suggesting that Gabby was still alive, giving the parents false hope in an effort to intentionally throw law enforcement off the trail of their son. For them to establish a claim against Drake, right, which is most attorneys are alleging this, and the argument being made is that when Drake appeared on the stage, his presence further excited the crowd. I don't see that as a winning argument, right? Merely the artist's presence causing a crowd surge, that's not the artist's responsibility. That instead would be the responsibility of the promoters and possibly the county facility for premises liability for failing to put it on in a manner that allowed the attendees to be safe. It's very different what they're alleging against Travis Scott. They're alleging that he intentionally incited the crowd and that did things to prevent the first responders to get access to the injured and the dying, and then contributed to their deaths. This exemplifies two of my major long-term concerns with the war on drugs, right? One, its disparate impact, and two, the creation of felons. Even if people actually had drugs in a possession, just a user amount, It takes a regular person and turns them into a felon. It was even worse here, right? And by regular person, I mean someone not out trying to harm other people or injure other people or steal from other people. What's worse here is he took regular people who weren't drug users and turned them into felons. Also, the disparate impact. I hate to suggest this, but it is my fear that it was his decision to plant drugs on middle-class white people that's actually what led to the investigation that ended up with his arrest. The delay in actually having trials and just the delay in resolving cases through plea bargains has impeded the actual administration of justice, right? And people would say justice delayed is justice denied.
What aspects of pandemic-style court proceedings do you think are going to stick around after the fact? Is virtual going to become a standard?
I hope that it doesn't. And this is from my criminal defense attorney's perspective. Now that the prosecutors are back in court, we're actually getting cases resolved. Just from a citizen's perspective, we need functioning courtrooms. We need functioning jury trials.
Why can't that happen remotely successfully?
Because it's just not the same. When you can't sit down and have a discussion with a prosecutor, you can't stand up and look at the panel of potential jurors and look them in the eye and select them. If you can't walk up and talk to the judge in person, it just doesn't work the same. Unfortunately, it would make my life easier. If I could sit here in my home studio and do all of my work on this computer, it'd be easier. But it's not fair to my clients and it's not fair to the criminal justice system. In Arkansas, when you're studying for your driver's exam, you are actually told by the state to turn on your flashers, slow down, and drive to where it's safe. The statute requires you to immediately pull over for emergency vehicles. And that's pretty much a uniform traffic code statute throughout this country. But they are expressly taught to do exactly what this woman did. You know, a lot of people watching the clip are under the mistaken impression that there was a much longer chase. All of this occurred within 120 seconds. It's absolutely inappropriate. In fact, I think he should be arrested and charged with attempted murder or aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Well, I didn't have any more got to be good space, so I used this.
The answer that I want to tell you is obviously not. And that's what the human being in me wants to say, that this is absurd. No lawyer would take this. This is all her fault. Show some personal responsibility. But unfortunately, that's not really the law. The law is if you market a product that is potentially dangerous, you need to warn the users not of just the intended uses, but the unintended but reasonably foreseeable uses. And that's very fact-based. So there will be some, if she hires a real attorney that's going to be aggressive with this, and in the discovery process, if there was ever any discussion at Gorilla Glue about the potential that someone would use this aerosol can and spray it in their hair, and they in fact left the warning off to not use it in your hair, that could be a reasonably foreseeable unintended use.
And Tex, when you hear that from these individuals saying your words are irresponsible and you need to have full responsibility when you make statements like that, your thoughts on that, Tex?
Well, I speak with authority, and I stand on the Constitution and also stand on the Word of God.
What part of the Constitution
this is not
says
my,
Donald Trump is going to be president?
rodeo. And the thing is bottom line is this: Joe Biden's going to be arrested. So's Kamala. He's draining the swamp. He will be.
Oh, Jesus, Isaiah! Really, you're going to make people listen to this? I mean, I think it's fair for Dr. Olesen to suggest that cop that died is somehow related to this moron. Okay, just because they share a race, Dr. Olesen. I think that's a false equivalence and an unfair conflation to that poor dead officer. Tex is the worst part of America because he's a tiny little guy who's probably never been in any violence in his life, but he talks about violence as if he would engage in it because he's a clown. And that officer that died serving in this country. Tex won't risk his life for anybody. He's just a little bitty coward that talks about spears and talks about serving him, but he's never been in a war or served this country. He's never done anything for anybody but himself.
Having committed crimes like what we saw in the Capitol.
Well, it's very provincial. Criminal defense and the criminal prosecution is very location-based. And I will tell you an answer that most people don't want to hear. I have defended a number of police officers charged with doing violent crimes, right? I have always found like it is far easier to defend police officers. I feel like judges give them breaks that they wouldn't give other people. I think jurors want to believe your police defendant. You do have some DA's offices that actually target and go after and punish police officers harder, offer them more steals. So I think it cuts both ways. I just don't think someone can continue to be a law enforcement officer in this city if he was actively involved in the insurrection in D.C., not the protest. Now, if he was just there protesting, that's as American as apple pie, and he has every right to be there. It's a matter of public concern, and they should not fire him for that if that's what he did. But if he entered the Capitol, if he broke the law, he's got to go.